Hi, everyone. I'm Nate Shear, your host, and welcome to Mindforce, a podcast where we dive into love, life, and learning because your mind truly matters. Today, we have Mariah Pettry, and we'll be talking about trauma, addiction, and most importantly, healthy relationships. So, Mariah, I'd like to give you the floor for some opening comments. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I am Mariah, and I'm a wife, a mama of two. I'm currently going to school to be a therapist, and I have some minors in marketing and sales. And I have 7 years sober from heroin. I was homeless and lived on the streets for about 5 years. I went to 26 rehabs, 12 overdoses, and I'm still alive and kicking.
Wow, those are some impressive numbers, but not quite in the right way, but impressive all the same. So I'd like to open the floor and see if you had any questions for me before we start on the interview.
So before we kind of began, we were talking about how you've moved around. And I kind of want to know what that did. Has it built you up like mentally, and has it helped you? Or is there times where it gets like a little bit hard to move every time?
So yeah, that's a really good question. I think the military as a whole, being active duty and moving every couple of years, has really built up a lot of resiliency in me. One thing that me and my wife joke about quite a bit is, so we landed in Seattle, Washington from Japan from our last move, and then had to pick up a car from my sister and take that car from Seattle all the way to Florida, all the way to Fort Walton Beach. And so along the way, we had this trailer that had 8 large luggages across the back. And we stopped at different hotels, and, people like to steal stuff and, not as trustworthy as they used to be. So we had to take these 8 luggages in every night to each hotel at every time we stopped. And every time we seemed to do it, there'd be someone in the parking lot. And every time it seemed like, I don't know if it was 100%, but it sure felt like it. Somebody would say, "How do you do it?"
Yeah.
And we both looked at each other and was like, we have to.
Yeah.
There's no option. So it was always interesting to us because they were making it seem like, you make that choice, or you get a choice, or there is a say in the matter. We get orders, we get directed to go somewhere, and we figure out the best way. And, maybe we scream at times or cry at times or whatnot, but like you just take the next step forward and you keep going. So there's some power, even though it sounds weird and like not having the choice, where you don't really get to think about it all that much.
Yeah.
So we just make it happen. So I think it's really built a lot. I lost my dad, and I've gone through a divorce and do some co-parenting. And I think the military has really given me the tools. Not that any of those things are easier or easy, but it does make them slightly easier because we've gone through different languages and registering cars in different countries and all the errands on getting your utilities set up in a foreign country and things like that. So like we were talking about before we started, but resiliency comes on the other side of something difficult. You don't get to have the badge of resiliency without doing the hard stuff. So I think going through all these different things, you get to the other side and well, I've done something before. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's adjacent. Maybe it's, a parallel thing. But we've gone through difficult times and looked back and gotten them done. So that was a little longer than I think. But that's a great question. I think it really builds resiliency getting through those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like adaptability. Like we have like an innate like survival mechanism to go through, like get through whatever we're going through. Right. But even as you were saying that though, like all of the minor things that people probably don't even think about, like you said, you have to set up the utilities, get in your car legal, and probably get in like a new ID, don't you? Like
new ID, new phone number. I can't even remember my phone numbers at this point because I had the Japanese number, the UK number. So even today I was somewhere and they was like, "Can I have your number?" And I have to look it up on my phone. And every time they kind of look at me a little goofy, like, "Why do you not know your own phone number?" I'm like, if you knew I had 6 phone numbers over the last, 10 years, you'd understand. Like, I have to go into Amazon to look at my previous addresses to figure out where I've lived sometimes. So, yeah, it's
That's
definitely
so funny.
pretty interesting. We have to do our security clearance every 10 years. And every time you do that, you have to say everywhere you've ever lived and every phone number you ever had. And so you're like,
boy.
It's funny because we commonly use Amazon now. Everyone's like, check your addresses. Oh, all your addresses are still in there. Where did I ship stuff before?
That's a
So if
good
you didn't
tip.
know,
I never thought of that. That's good. That's a good tip.
go into Amazon, your addresses, and they should all be there unless you deleted them, but they should be there.
Just gotta
I
find
did want
somewhere
to
to
ask
store
before
them.
we started, the show has nothing to do with weather, of course, but you are in Georgia. So could you give us a sneak peek into kind of how things are going there? And I'm sure it's pretty rough, but how are things going?
Man, so we're good now. I mean, Helene rocked us as a community, like as a whole. It was really, I've never been through, I'm originally from West Virginia. We moved down here like right before the pandemic, like January 2020. And so, I've never been through like a tornado or a hurricane. And whenever they said this was coming, it wasn't supposed to hit us. Like it was supposed to kind of go away from us, but it shifted. And there was tornado outbreaks like everywhere. A tornado went around our house. Like you could see where it went. I mean, the whole, like the kids' clubhouse that was attached to a tree got picked up and thrown. My greenhouse was done. The chicken coop was done, but the chickens were safe and the ducks. So like they stayed grounded. I'm grateful for that. Just little things like, but it didn't touch the structure of the home. Thank God. Like that was the biggest thing was the wind. We didn't have the flooding like Tennessee and North Carolina did. Like I keep seeing videos pop up on like Instagram or Facebook, and it's just so devastating to watch. I couldn't imagine my home that we own, that we worked so hard for, just like watching it wash away. There was no gas anywhere. There were no generators. Price gouging was happening. Gas prices were like $5 a gallon because you couldn't have like regular or plus. There was only premium. They were out and no gas trucks would come. All of the grocery stores had no, like, like the outer edge of the grocery stores where there's all the fresh produce and freezer and fridge stuff, meats, all of that was gone. So it was interesting. We had to drive like an hour or two away to get what we needed. And then thank God, my husband, my father-in-law, he met us like 3 hours away to give us a generator. So that's how we got one, to make sure the kids had what they needed. Food wasn't spoiled. It's been a journey. It has, but we've got everything cleaned up and we're good now. Like we're kind of back to life. We didn't have electric for about a week and a half. So yeah, it was interesting, but we made do. So
That's wild. I was out in Guam when Typhoon Dolphin came through and I lost power for like 9 days. So that's my only experience without having power in that tropical environment where it's like high humidity and high heat. I think I ended up dragging my mattress out to the back patio just to get some fresh air. And I woke up covered in bug bites. So it was like one or the other, covered in bugs or
yeah.
But I did want to ask, you had talked about like that survival instinct and things like that. Are people coming together to help each other and stuff like that?
Yes. So we have like, I highly recommend that even if you don't have like any, like natural disasters that have happened, there's Facebook groups for these small communities. And I went and like everybody's updating you for one. For two, there's people like, hey, they're giving out MREs, they're giving out tarps, they're giving out water and ice. And so that was extremely helpful. The National Guard, I believe, came down here. But they were really busy and they couldn't take it to these really small communities where some people couldn't afford, gas to drive 2 hours away to go get gas or to go get food. And there's children there, there's pregnant women, elderly, disabled, so me and my friend and a bunch of other people, it wasn't just me and her, there was a bunch of other people saying like, hey, does anybody need anything extra? We can bring it to you. We can drop it off. And so, yeah, we all really, it was, and I didn't really know my community before this, to be honest. I'm kind of a homebody. So I got to know a lot of people and the community really came together. It was pretty amazing.
That's good. It's good to hear they're coming together. So we'll transition over to trauma. We'll move on from hurricanes, but it is really interesting to hear all that's going. Hopefully everyone's safe through this next one as well. Hit Tampa pretty hard.
Yeah.
But the first question I had for you, in the realm of trauma, how do you think trauma can sneak into a relationship without us even realizing it?
Good question. So, first of all, something that I have found, I was a trauma coach for 3 years, and then, I kind of pivoted to like business and trauma. Um, but something that I've noticed within all of my clients and based off of all the research that I've done is that our emotional maturity, so not our maturity or like obviously how grown we are, but our emotional maturity, our reactions and our behaviors, um, are stuck at the age where we had our first big T trauma. And so our reactions in our relationships, the behaviors, and, certain things that we can't control, like almost like temper tantrums in our own little ways. I think that is what really happens in relationships. If we get into an argument or just little nitpick things, I think those things after a while can kind of build on top of each other and really eventually do some damage, especially if one or the other, like the husband or the wife or the friends aren't willing to work with each other. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll kind of expand on it a little bit. How have you noticed that unresolved trauma? How does it shape the way people act in the relationships? Do you have any examples that aren't obviously sharing anything, but
Yeah. Um, so wait, what? So say the question again. I lost
so
it.
that unresolved trauma, how does that show up in how they act to the relationship, the things they do to their partner? Can you give any examples of that?
Oh yeah. I I think that the way that we're raised, sometimes we don't recognize that things are wrong. Sometimes we just it's the culture. We were talking about cultures earlier.
Mm.
And even though like America has its own culture, the UK, Japan, like everyone has their own culture, each family has their own culture and their own way of doing things. And um maybe the way that they're acting or responding, they don't recognize that it's wrong. Not that it's an excuse at all, but sometimes people need to be aware and need to be told, hey, like this, this is bothering me. This is hurting me. Um, that's how I would kind of see it, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, like, what your advice would be for that first step, because it feels like when you go to church and you hear a good sermon, or you hear certain bits of information, you're like, everyone else could use this. It's
Yeah.
always seems like it's like everyone else. So you wouldn't want to say like, "Hey, you always do this to me." So if you were
Right.
having things like that, what's the first step to try to get through that?
Yeah. So the being comfortable, I mean, being able to be comfortable, you should be able to talk to your partner or your friend in a comfortable way without thinking, oh God, this is going to escalate. Oh no, this is going to be bad. If you don't feel safe and secure in that situation and speaking to them, there's a red flag immediately. Like, but it's not always good to point the finger and say it in a mean way. There's a loving way to go about everything. Like there's a way that you can work things out in a way that doesn't escalate the situation. It doesn't hurt the other person. It just makes them aware of it. And so maybe in a like a love sandwich, like this this is or hey, the other day whenever we were doing this, I remember you said something to me and it may not seem like a big deal, but for me it was, and it hurt me a little bit. But, I love you. Is there any way, I don't know, like some kind of like, you gotta like love on top, let them know the issue, love right after. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
And there's just a
Yeah.
way to go about it instead of trying to point it all at them and make them feel, because a lot of people will shut down if they feel defenseless or like they're a problem. My husband's kind of like that. He'll take things personal. And so our relationship is kind of different though, in a way that we joke a lot and we may argue, but we'll blow it off for a little bit, know that we need to go our separate ways for just just a few hours or something. And then we'll come back together and we'll like laugh about it and everything will be fine. But I recognize not everybody's like that. So yeah, that kind of went that way. Sorry, but that's kind of what in my mind.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I heard Simon Sinek, he talked about it once, and he said if you mention three things, no matter what the order is or whatnot, if you mention the three, confrontations will always be better. I guess all the science, the research and whatnot, and it's what you've done specifically. So you got to avoid the always and the nevers, because that's not specific. You never take out the trash and things like that. You, just like you said, like, hey, last Wednesday, this occurred. So you could be specific with that. How it made you feel, which you just touched on as well. So that brings it back to the person instead of kind of pointing it the other way. I felt this way, and there's really nothing the other person can do too much with that because it's how they feel. Right. And then the last thing he says is what will happen if it continues. So he ends with, if you continue this, I'll, drive farther away. I'll lose respect, whatever that impact is. And then you just stop. And he said, you can repeat it again, but don't say anything else and then let it be. And then the person has to, identify and process that. And they could either, change what they're doing or they keep doing it. But the boundary of, saying what would happen if it continues, then unfortunately that outcome has to come. But I like that. It's two of the three were definitely there in your answer. So I think that's
really good.
Really good.
I don't think I've ever heard that. That's good.
Yeah, being specific and how it made you feel, I think, are super important. And that last one's just there. Hopefully, the person does try to help. But if not, you have to continue that boundary. So, which leads us into the next question. The question I had moves into the addiction portion. So someone that is recovering from addiction, how do you set up boundaries with that person without like cutting them off completely and feeling kind of guilty that you've cut them out?
That's
healthy boundaries.
Yes. So this is going to sound harsh, but as far as, what happened with me, my family had, I had lost lost custody of my son during my addiction. And so the only times that I got to see my son was whenever my mom and my grandma were around. That's mainly who I had in my life during, my 10, 15 years or 10, 11-ish years of addiction. And I would steal from them. I would always ask them for money. And whether I said it was for gas, whether I said it was for cigarettes or whatever, I would go and run and go buy dope with it. So you can never, first and foremost, never, ever, ever, ever cash, never give money. That is the first boundary. Absolutely. Because it doesn't matter what they say it's for. If they need a light bill paid and they have their children with them, still, then, okay, I can pay it for you. What's the name of the company? What's the, things like that. But even that to it, if they're asking, can you pay my light bill? Can you pay my water bill? Can you give me gas? Can you do these constantly is totally unhealthy and they're taking advantage. What needs to happen ultimately is they really need to fall flat on their face. And I know that sounds so harsh. It does, but it's the absolute truth, because as long as they're comfortable and as long as they have everything that they need, they're not going to have any reason to turn around and change. This is comfortable. I can keep doing this. I have everything that I need. I have shelter, food, water, whatever. My family, I was not allowed at their homes because I kept stealing from them, even sentimental items at one point, and it breaks my heart looking back on it now. And I don't even recognize that person that I'm talking about whenever I talk about that. But anyway, so they eventually they didn't give me money. They didn't really help me with much. Sometimes if I said I was really hungry, they would send a pizza to the abandoned house I was staying at or wherever I was, occasionally. And then they moved away. So I was there by myself and rock bottom hit, then the trap door fell through, another rock bottom hit, trap door fell through. So the boundaries are no money. Absolutely not. You can love them and you can talk to them and you can support them. Let them know that they are loved, because in that moment, no matter how angry, frustrated, and like, they've lost like all respect for themselves. So no matter how they're acting, like, you can never go wrong with, answering people in love. Like, you can never go wrong with that. So all they really need is like encouragement, support. And other than that, I think that that's all that it needs to be. Because if you keep giving them things, like I said, the comfortability is going to stay there, and, they'll run with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have to ask, hopefully not too personal, but listeners that are out there like, I would never do heroin. That's too far of a bridge. But could you walk us through how, the trauma and how you got to that point?
Yeah, sure. So, I was, my mom was married, about 6 times because of, like, the men were either, they didn't act appropriately towards me, or they were abusive towards my mom. So she married a lot, and then, like, through no fault of her own, and we moved around a lot as well. So my dad remarried once, and my stepmom was extremely abusive from 3 to 9. And then during my, one of my mom's marriages, I had an older brother who, also, began to abuse me from about 10 to 15. And I held that in. I didn't tell my mom until 15, whenever, something bad was really going to happen. And I knew that, like, cause it almost did. So we moved back to West Virginia. But from 12, like at 12, I started drinking and smoking, like, just, with my older brother or stepbrother. And so whenever we moved back to West Virginia, the people who were smoking and drinking were also doing small pain pills at parties and things. And so I would do it, and I got addicted around 16, maybe. And I was doing them, and I had to have them at this point. Well, you build up a tolerance to the small pain pills, and then you need a stronger pain pill. And then they start getting really expensive. And I remember at the time, the pain pills that I was doing costed like up to $180 for one pill. And I was a waitress at the time at 2 different places, and I couldn't keep up with it until I met a guy. He was a drug dealer, and he became my boyfriend. That's the father of my son. And he passed away 2 years ago, unfortunately. But anyway, so he was like, well, the pills are this much, I'm going to quit selling them, but there is heroin, and it's the same thing. It's cheaper. It might be dirtier, but it's cheaper. And I'm like, okay, I'm sick right now, and I'm not paying $180. I'll just pay $20 for this, right? And so that's kind of how that escalated.
So is your thought process like trying to escape and not feel, or can you kind of explain what that thought process is, or is it just kind of chasing the next thing?
Yeah, so during my addiction, I could have used all of the reasons in the world to use for trauma. Like, oh, I've been through this and I've been through this. And then on the streets and in the like addiction world, traumas happen to you left and right. You're always on edge. So I could have used that. I honestly wanted to be like the bad girl. I had a pretty decent life. My mom, I had everything that I needed, but do you remember that movie 13 coming out?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, I want to be that girl and piercing my belly button in the school bathroom. I mean, I really craved that. But then I also kept using for 2 reasons. nothing to do with my trauma. First of all, I liked the way that it made me feel, and it could, it opened me up where I was kind of shy. And so I liked the feeling. I liked the way it made me feel. It made me feel warm and, like this fuzzy feeling for maybe 5 hours. And also, I used for so long because the withdrawals are absolutely horrendous. I mean, like
Mm.
I would like it's like the flu times like 1,000. You're just shaking and you're cold, but you're hot. But like the feeling of the wind brushing off your skin makes your skin crawl. Like you're throwing up. You're in the bathroom constantly. Your eyes are watering. Your nose is running. Just everything. It's absolutely awful. And then if somebody told you like I have this and it'll make you feel better instantly, you take it. Or you can feel like this for about a week and a half. So,
Dang, yeah, that's rough.
yeah.
That is rough. So I had a question. In the military, I think, there's probably a widespread issue with alcohol. And so you have a lot of people that are drinking, and a lot of times it's chalked up to socially and things like that. What are some of the ways where that addiction has, passed a certain boundary or whatnot? Because I feel like a lot of times, like, oh no, it's fine, it's fun, I just do it. Are there key things where you're like, maybe I need help? What are those?
Yeah. So, deep down, whether anybody wants to admit it out loud or not, the first thing is they will know. Like they will know that they take things too far. But it's like the person, like whenever we first moved down here, and I thought that I was like a normal adult and like, oh, I can function now. Like I've got my kids, everything's good. Like, I thought I could drink a glass of wine as a normal person, using quotations. And, it went from literally a glass of wine to 2 bottles of wine within a week. And that lasted for about a month every single night. And there's people who just take it way too far. Like, I'm not just going to drink 1 or 2 beers. I have to keep going. That's an addiction side of things. But also, if you're drinking every single night, if you're drinking, if if you cannot go through a weekend or a week without alcohol because you can't be yourself, or you feel like that's just what you always do and it could turn into something else. But then again, like I said, there's that aspect of how much do you drink? So are you just drinking like 2 or 3 beers on Saturdays and Sundays? Or are you drinking like cases of beers Saturday and Sunday and you feel like crap Monday and Tuesday? Right?
Mm.
So does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
I think that's perfect. Do you think there is people personality wise or whatever that have those more addictive personalities where they just need to do all or none?
Um, Yeah,
Or do
I
you
think
think,
it's in our genes.
yeah,
I think that alcoholism and addiction, which, addiction, alcoholism, it's the same thing. Any addict can become addicted to anything. Um, and so it comes down like from the generations. I really do believe that it's just something where we don't get enough dopamine that just
mm,
runs through our genes. And as soon as we feel that rush of dopamine that we've never felt before, that like neurodivergent people maybe have from simple little things, I think I think it runs in the veins, and you've got to kind of like a generational curse kind of you've got to stop it or it's going to continue down the line.
that makes sense. So when you were, going through that process and things like that, you started to talk about the trap door. But what was the actual pivot point where you were at the bottom and needed to get help?
Yeah, so I was homeless, but I was also a prostitute for about 5 years. During my homeless stint, And I lost all dignity. I couldn't even look myself in the mirror. I weighed like 98 pounds soaking wet. I'm 140 now. So like I was skin and bones. I was doing heroin and meth. So I was like, doing that to stay awake, to make sure that I could pay for my dope for the next day. It was just a really chaotic cycle. And like I said, I had overdosed 12 times. Each time I overdosed, I reached in my pocket looking for my dope. Each time I went to rehab, I would run away. And I hated God. Like I did. I absolutely hated God. Because I thought he was the cause of everything that had happened to me. And, I had went through something, which I don't want to trigger anyone, but I had met somebody who had set me up basically, and it involved like multiple, people, and they left me for dead. And, I remember calling a friend, and they came and picked me up and let me take a shower at their house and just, kind of clean up. So I went there, and I remember being, like on the floor, on my knees, getting ready to get in the shower. And I was like, okay, God, so if you're real, then you're going to prove yourself to me. Because I don't believe you. All these people talk about you and how great you are. All these churches have shunned me. They've all made me feel like so disgusting. They've made me feel like I am not worthy of you. Cause I judged God through people. And so like imperfect people. But I said, if you're real, you're going to get me out of this. You can prove yourself. And if you do, I will be a soldier for you. I'll go to war. I'll do whatever it is. I don't care. Like, just tell me, but that's if you can get me out of this. So let's see what you're made of. Like it was my last hope. I was so angry. I know I'm like all bubbly and cheery, like, now, but I was like oh gosh. I was just an angry, angry soul for a very long time. And I wasn't mad at anybody else necessarily. I don't think I was even mad at God. I think I just wanted somebody else to blame than myself, And, so, 2 weeks later, I, got a felony. I got arrested and I went to jail for about 4 months. Got out in between there on probation for a weekend and overdosed twice in that weekend. And my probation officer was like, you failed your drug test. And I was like, yeah, I thought you'd give me a shot and give me a chance. I just got out of jail. No. So she threw me back in jail. And then, I had a meeting with her. And she said, so here's the deal. I can get you out of jail, but you will be court ordered to a year-long faith-based rehab, no phone, no cigarettes, no secular TV, no secular music. You don't go anywhere except for church, and you're just around a big group of women. And I'm like, but like, so mad. My 27th rehab, but I was like, it's better than here. Like, I knew the women in there. I wasn't necessarily like, I wasn't uncomfortable there. I was actually happy because I had shelter, because I had food and all that. So anyway, I go, and I was really angry at first for the first 3 months. And then everyone was so welcoming, so loving. Everybody's so nice to me. And I eventually started reading the Bible and listening to what they said at church. And the biggest thing is that they said that there was nothing wrong with me. I thought there was something wrong with me. I used to look at normal people and think, how do they do life? Like, how do they just like wake up and take care of their kids and like do dishes and laundry? Like, how do people do that? You don't understand that. It was the fear of responsibility for me. And so, yeah, I actually stayed an extra year helping the women coming in, and met my husband, got pregnant, and got my son back, and had my daughter, and yeah.
There you go. That's the turning point.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, you helping out with the trauma section and addiction and things like that, what advice do you have for those family members and things like that? I feel like the family members are there. You said kind of love from afar, and, love can never go wrong. But how, what advice you have for those family members that are watching? Because you said 12 times, 26, so someone else is watching and watching you fail repeatedly. Like, how do they not get burnt out?
So family members and loved ones of addicts and alcoholics go through a worse time than what the addicts and alcoholics do, because they are numb 100%. And then but I also want them to know that that is not them. The decisions that I made in my addiction are something that I cannot even imagine doing now. They have this cloak around them that's like literally a blindfold to consequences and what they're doing to other people. My mom and them, everyone in my family, I have apologized to them and apologized to them, and they're, all they wanted was for me to be where I am now. But just like I have a friend whose son, he just keeps going to jail and he keeps getting in trouble and he keeps relapsing, and they don't know what to do. And she sat down, she invited me over to come talk, and she had pen and paper, and she's like, so what can we do to get him sober? And I'm like, so here's the thing. We have no control. And that's probably the biggest step that they have to take. And it's the hardest step ever, is accepting that there's nothing you can do, and also accepting that this is not their fault. This has nothing to do with them. It isn't their parenting. It isn't a result of anything that they have done wrong. Because like I said, I will probably be the only person to ever admit this, but I got high because I wanted to. I enjoyed it. So I went through trauma in my life and I was a young child, but that is not the reason I got high. I wasn't even thinking about that. So the, accepting that there's not really much that they can do to change them, even though they wish they could just like shake them back into just get it. And until they finally hit that breaking point of I am willing to do whatever it is. I don't care what it is. I'll do it. That's the complete surrender. That's whenever they'll change. And there's nothing anybody can do. Unfortunately. That's a bad answer. I'm so sorry, but it's the truth.
No, I completely agree. I know I've had a couple episodes, and we had talked on a person making the choice themselves in multiple different episodes. So, I mean, that comes up kind of repeatedly. We want to make people do certain things, but ultimately it's the person. The person has to come around, even on completely different topics we've talked about. So not even just addiction and things like that, but making better choices and things like that. Sometimes, or not sometimes, I think all the time it's up to that person, especially when it comes from a parent or someone else. Like, that's not cool when it comes from you or, a sibling or whatnot. Like, you don't know, you don't understand. But yeah, it is kind of interesting. I wanted to ask, in trauma and addiction, have you seen that lead to codependent relationships?
100%. Because we're codependent on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go.
So you mean like trauma and addiction combined and then go into relationships, or?
Either or, just how that dependency, because you had kind of talked about cycles. And so another question I wanted to ask was kind of getting out of that cycle. So you have the boyfriend that is the drug dealer and he's supplying, and, they kind of has a whole nother cycle, even though we're talking about the overall cycle of addiction. But how does that work as we're talking about healthy relationships? If you're codependent, how do you get out?
So, something I didn't mention was a very, very abusive So this is like somewhat embarrassing, but I've already told my story so many times, but it happened. So I was with the drug dealer, but I was also with somebody else, a guy I'd been on and off with for about 3 years. And he was extremely like mentally and physically abusive. My son's father wasn't abusive. He just, did the drugs, and it was like more like we would argue. But anyway, the abusive relationship that I was in, I used my whole pregnancy with my son, and I thought that it was this guy's baby, and it wasn't. It ended up being, the drug dealers. And so it was a very abusive relationship from start to finish. It always was. And I thought that I would be the one to save and change him because I couldn't save or change myself. And I believe that's kind of what like codependency has to do with. It was like, I thought that nobody else would love me, or I thought that he was eventually going to change. I never got out of it. He actually hit me so hard that he knocked me out with my son in my arms, and that's how I lost custody of my son. Then he smashed my phone. He called my mom, smashed my phone, left, and they came and got my son from me. So he left. I think it's just like addiction, though. It is an addiction. A codependent, abusive relationship is something that, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And whenever it gets to the point where you just can't take it anymore, you leave. But if I could have gotten out of it sooner, I would. I've never done it personally, so I'm not the person to say how to get out of it, because there's more than just like surface level generic answers there. I feel like that would need to come from somebody who like has went through a severely or like a codependent abusive relationship and came out of it, because there's more to it than just like leave. Become aware that they're hurting you, So
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So we'll flip it then. We'll go on the more positive note. That's probably the easier way. So we've talked about red flags. Red flags are good. What are some green flags? How do you know you're in a good, healthy relationship?
Awesome. Okay. I can do that one.
Yes.
I actually have an amazing, amazing husband. Wow. I don't know. Like, he is my best friend. I feel like he is a part of me. I call him after everything that happens during my day. I mean, like I can call him. He doesn't act aggravated with me. He'll call me and do the same thing. We joke all the time. Green flags would be the comfortable feeling of like, I don't have to really impress this person anymore. I mean, it's good to get dressed up and get cute. Like, I love doing that. Like, I know that I'm dressed up today, so he's going to come home and be like, oh, like you look beautiful, but, anyway, the comfortable aspect, and really like the best friend thing. I really think that's what it is. Like, I can call him and know that he would be there. Whenever we talk about things, also, like if we're arguing, I think everybody has their own unique personality. And so it really just depends on like how their personalities get along together. Are they constantly clashing? Are you constantly arguing? Things like that. If you're always going against each other and somebody's too stubborn to recognize, oh, that hurt her or that hurt him, like having empathy for one another. Yeah. Does that I don't know. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I guess what I was trying to get after a little bit is, I've been married twice, and I remember going through the first one, and you have some challenges and things are difficult. And it's interesting because at that point, you've never been married before. And so it seemed like things were, more difficult than they should have been, but I thought they were difficult because that was just the way it is. But being in the second one, you start to feel that connection and that, that click and things like that. So even though not all days are perfect, because there's going to be ups and downs and life is going to be difficult. Like I think you said, the best friend in that connection, because there's going to be, challenges and, disagreements on how the dishes go in the dishwasher and finances and, other things. But I think in life, there's everything about balance. Because I think you can't be polar opposites, because then it's too hard for you to connect or understand where that person comes from. Yeah. But you also don't want to date the copy of yourself, because that's weird. And so you want like things where, it's not exactly you, but it's not polar opposites. Because it's interesting. I heard, growing up, we would say opposites attract, but it wasn't until later, after I went through my first marriage, I found that they continued the phrase, or someone else, maybe a different researcher or whatnot. They said opposites attract, but then they attack because they're so far apart. When they'd come into different disagreements and things, they were so far apart. They were attracted initially because that's something that you don't identify with. And it was so interesting. It's like, I'm not that. And so I'm, spontaneous and crazy and whatnot. And my first wife, very, list organized. And, the example I always use is going to Disneyland. Like, I'll just go to Disneyland and walk around. It is what it is. And she'd have like 8 a.m., 8:15, 8:20, 8:30. And that's relaxing and good for her to have that list of like what rides you're going on in what specific order. And for me, that drains me. And so you want someone to be slightly different, but not too far different. So I think as with anything in life, it's all about balance. But do you have anything else on like some of the disagreements and things that come up that, are healthy, but, not too far? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no.
Not everything's going to be perfect, right?
No, yeah, that's right. I know I make my relationship seem like butterflies and rainbows, and like for the most part it is, but in the beginning it was very rocky. We are both recovering addicts. And so we both got sober around the same time-ish. And so he actually got sober after me. He was actually using during while I was pregnant with my daughter. And so we really struggled in the beginning. So those disagreements, divorce is so easy to come by nowadays. And I swore that, after watching my mom go through relationship after relationship, that I really, once I got married, I'm staying married. I joke with my husband all the time. I'm like, well, you're stuck with me now. Like, if you leave, like, I'll get your life insurance money, but I would never, you know what I mean? So, but there is disagreements and there is things that, you're going to disagree on, but it's about overcoming that and trying not to make it such a big deal. But that is so true. We look for the things that we're missing in ourselves sometimes in our partners. So when women crave love and men crave respect, that's, what psychology kind of teaches. And so being appreciative of what each other does is something that I found really helps our relationship. But if he was he's like super anxious and I'm the calm, annoyingly optimistic one. So we do balance each other out. It is good to have to balance each other out, right?
Yeah, that's so funny. I used to hear, how come you're not worried more? I was like, I don't know.
Is your wife anxious?
Yeah. More so than me. She sometimes wants me to be more. I'm like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think
too.
that's splitting up responsibilities and things like that. But I don't know. My dad passed pretty young in his 50s, and there was a lot of life left before him. And so some of those things, I was always pretty upbeat and bubbly and optimistic and things like that. But when he passed and didn't get to do a lot of the things, he left a good chunk of money for my mom and gave that to her. And I just kind of dwell on that quite a bit because he worked, 50, 60 hours a week, put the stuff aside, gave it to my mom, which of course super appreciative too. But it's we wanted to take a trip was one thing we wanted to do. I was like, well, let's just pick a spot on the map, like Rome. Let's go see the Colosseum or something. But he was so convinced that, I'll just beat the cancer, be done, and then, we'll go. And then 1 year turned into 2 years, and then so on from there, and, kept deteriorating. So, money is one thing. You can't take it with you. And I wish we would have just jumped on an airplane, went and did something. And so that kind of leads me into like, you only live once, not like no responsibility, YOLO, just like go crazy and get a Ferrari, but there's just not too much it's going to take down a whole day of my time. There's only so much that, figure it out, bounce back and move on, because, we don't know when the last day is going to be. So I kind of carry that on a little bit.
How long ago was it that he passed away?
It's been 5-6 years. I forget the exact time frame. But yeah, it's rough. My family's still going through a little bit of challenges with that. Like my little brother was in a transitional period. So I think it's interesting you mentioned the big T earlier. He was graduating from high school, and so he's supposed to be going to college. His friends were all going to go out and have fun, and it happened right then. And it just seems like it's really been a challenge for him, because my little sister was younger, I was older, had the support system, my family and things like that. But it really just kind of wrecked my little brother there in the middle, because he wanted to transition and go and do the things you're supposed to do and have fun. And college is, a good time. And so that really, you don't want to take your dad in a wheelchair to your high school graduation. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So
there's a lot of little things that go into it's so. I'm so sorry. There's a lot of things that happens, and I'm sure he's watching down on all of y'all, but at the same time, it's still really hard. We can say, well, he's watching us, but he's not there. Like if you wanted to call him, so I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, that's the things that get me. It's interesting how everyone processes it differently. I think my brother and my sister, I got hit pretty hard. My sister just got married 2 weeks ago, and so didn't have anyone to walk her down the aisle. And so my sister and brother, I think they have the challenges of the bigger things. But for me, it's for some reason the small things, like we switched uniforms in the military, and we went from one to another, and my dad was in. And for some reason, I wanted to call him and just, kind of joke about how we changed. I get the new stuff. I got to get the new boots. And so that first day I wore in the new uniform, I just had a rough day. And that's such a small, minor detail, but it's like, that'd be fun just to exchange this thing with someone that's important to me and, be able to do that. But so it is interesting. I think they get hit with the bigger things, and I kind of get hit with the smaller things that, maybe shouldn't matter, but matter to me. So.
Yeah, they're big to you. Yeah, absolutely. Things that remind you of him. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I lost my grandpa too, and I wrote this up on Facebook because it was so interesting to me. I sat in a dirt field with him in this old, I think, Nissan truck, and he taught me how to drive stick. And so we sat, and he would not let me leave first gear. It was roll the car, stop for, I think, hours, like an hour, 2 hours. It was quite a while. I didn't get to do second, third, fourth, like none of the fun ones. We'll figure out how to roll the car because that's the hardest one. And so I was living in Japan. I got a new car for myself, and it was a stick shift. And I was driving on my way to work, and just a waterworks. I just started crying and had this huge, overwhelming outpour of emotion because I thought back to him spending his time and effort to teach me is now something that I enjoy. I love shifting through the gears and pushing in the clutch and these things. And I wouldn't have had that if he didn't sit on some dusty field in the middle of Northern California teaching me in this truck. And so it's interesting because, I do kind of get hung up on those smaller things. But at that point, I mean, I don't know what the years are, but I mean, he had been gone for 15, 20 years. I mean, quite a while. So sometimes it sits in dormant and, I never really thought about it. But that day I hit the parking lot at work and, it was rough. It was a downpour.
Yeah.
The little
things. Our brain will release memories and things to process the trauma whenever it feels as though we're in a spot to process it. And so at that time, your brain's like, here's this, here's this memory. And then like that was the healing from it. You didn't like, shake it off or whatever. You let it process. So that was good. That was good.
Interesting. I did not
You
think about
listen.
that.
Yep.
Yeah. Great people. So last question I got for you. Where do you see the role of forgiveness, either self-forgiveness or forgiving others in trauma and or addiction?
I think there are two types of people. I've noticed it, whenever I was at that rehab, because that's whenever they were first coming in and they were first really, really dealing with some of the most, I mean, they're coming straight off the streets, straight from prison. Prison is its own world. But they're coming in and there's a lot to process. Some of them really, which is like me, this is kind of like the first type of person. I really struggled with forgiving myself. I can forgive others easily. And I've been taken advantage of for that. And I'm like, I have people pleasing tendencies. However, I struggled with forgiving self, but then there's other people like my husband who hold grudges and they really struggle with forgiving other people. So there's two different types. It just really depends. And it doesn't matter the level. I mean, I've seen severe levels of like PTSD and CPTSD where they still struggle with forgiving themselves and they don't even care about those other people. It's forgiving themselves. And then again, there's some people who they don't have a problem forgiving themselves. They have they can do that. That's fine. But trying to forgive other people and what they've done to them is also really, really difficult too. So two different things.
Interesting. Yeah, I could definitely see that. So we're wrapping up. I wanted to give you the floor to close out. What is the biggest takeaway for the listeners today?
Ooh. So I feel like we we touched on a bunch of trauma and then addiction. I feel like a big core of it was the addiction aspect, and how, there's family members and loved ones of addicts who really struggle with watching them go through it. That's what's biggest in my mind right now, anyway, from as I'm looking back. And I just would love to let them know once again that there is nothing wrong with the way that they did anything. They didn't do anything wrong to them to cause them to be this way. And then to try love them from afar, but also accept that there's nothing they can do. And then there's also, we talked about the relationship thing too. And I feel like I made my relationship beautiful. But we have worked really hard to get to this point. So as long as both parties are willing to really work on it and stick together, and you love each other and there's that a beautiful friendship there, then keep trying. And I think that's it.
Perfect. Well, Mariah, thank you for coming out. I hope you had a good time.
Yes, I really enjoyed it. Thank you. I'm so
Awesome.
honored.
So I'd encourage you listeners out there, share your thoughts and questions on social media. I got the Facebook page. There's a Buzzsprout for audio, YouTube and TikTok for videos. I love you all. See ya.